All right, welcome to Comprehensive Literacy for All book study, chapters 11 and 12. We're looking into using AT effectively and then organizing and delivering effective instruction. Okay, so right in the beginning of this chapter, we have the definitions according to IDEA of assistive technology devices and assistive technology services. So many of you are probably aware of this definition, but there may be some of you who aren't so aware. So we just wanted to go ahead and read this. AT devices include any item, piece of equipment, or product system, whether acquired commercially, off the shelf, modified, or customized, that is used to increase, maintain, or improve functional capabilities of individuals with disabilities. And throughout the book study, there's been many references to assistive technology in the chapters. We haven't always called it out as assistive technology, but a lot of the tools used include some low tech and high tech. So along with that comes assistive technology services, and that services directly assist a child with a disability in the selection, acquisition, or use of an assistive technology device. So that's important to remember, that services, the assessment process, the trials, the training of technology are in IDEA. All right, Sari, I think we can go on from there. If anyone has anything else to share there, feel free. So in the research brief, this is the quote that popped out. And I'm trying to think about, there was a lot of talk about what Rose had mentioned at the beginning of our discussion before the recording was started about use of symbols and learning to decode. But let's just read this statement and then we'll get into that discussion a little more. So decisions about AT must match the instructional goal or context and the user's needs. So because evidence suggests that pairing symbols with words makes it more difficult to learn to read the words, educators should avoid symbol-supported text for reading-related instruction goals. So however, in the body of the text on the research brief, it talked about how symbols would be used for communication support all day long, right? And I think in the earlier discussion about symbols being used when we're testing comprehension, that makes a lot of sense to me because that relates to the child expressing themselves about what they remember and recall and know of the text. So it makes sense that we'd be using their means of communication, which might have some symbol support there as well. So anyway, I just want to open up the discussion since that's one of the first things that was mentioned when we started today. So anyone want to share on the research brief and the idea of symbols, use of symbols?
I don't mind sharing. I shared earlier that as soon as I read that, I got out of my seat and I had to jot down my thoughts about this as a speech therapist, but I kind of feel like I do understand the exact point that they're making. And if there was a way, if we're working on fluency and not reading comprehension, that we could have that student work on, just like they said, a non-symboled word, but then maybe the symbol pops up after they've attempted reading it, because I just wonder what's the picture in their mind of that word. Do they really know what they read? That's my thought.
Yeah, this is Linda Schlief. So I was thinking that if it was that you were specifically teaching reading comprehension strategies, that, you know, if that was the goal of your lesson, was to teach reading comprehension strategies that kids should rely on to help them comprehend, then you would not want to include symbol supported text, because that's not something that's always available for kids to draw on. But if you're reading a social studies text, for example, or news to you, and the idea is for them to have access to the content, then using symbols certainly makes sense because we want to support that receptive comprehension. That's receptive communication, right? So that's kind of the way I think about it, is really being specific about, clear in your mind about what that instructional goal is, what your desired outcome is.
Mhm.
And I think there's the difference too about like the symbol paired to the word to read the word versus a picture reference to maybe help with the comprehension of that concept that's being described.
I think that's worth stating again or clarifying. Okay, thanks, Josh. Symbol or picture reference text to help. Okay, ask Dad.
To help comprehend the
Yes.
content, the content with what the sentence is about. And I think about that like with clicker sentences, if you've used that before.
Right.
Is it clicker sentences or that connect? But the one that has like the picture and then there's words that go along with it, and there's a picture reference. So versus, you know, like symbolate with word maker where each word. And it makes sense for some of those words they're talking about, like abstract words, is and do, because why not learn the symbol of the alphabet and the word when it's so abstract. But it is a really interesting topic for us to think about.
Well, another thing to think about is I think that often we don't think of switching to text-based AAC systems when students might be able or ready to use them, and maybe don't use the keyboard as much as we should or could, you know. So I mean, I think it's a good point too, that eventually the goal would be to move to a text-based system for the student because it's so much more efficient, right? In terms of saying what you want to say than a symbol-based system. So it really does hold true in the long run for AAC as well.
I appreciated this statement, and that was the example was the use of picture symbols to support communication the day are there, but those same symbols will do little to support them in learning to decode words and understand actual text.
I still have a heartburn about that. I don't know. I'm not all bought in on that.
You know, this is where we should invite Erickson for the next study. Actually, I think she wanted to come in at the end. So
she does. She wants to come to the last couple sessions. So this will be good.
We'll be talking about with her. We have a hard time with this.
Well, and the whole time I kept criticizing that word reading because they aren't specific about what kind of reading skill are we talking about right there. Obviously, it has to be decoding. But when she says comprehension in there, I don't know.
Well, we will be looking for greater clarity and
that's all right.
looking into that research a little more. And I think learning other strategies and how they work then helps us then move on to more evidence-based practices that are proven. Okay, so then the next talks about making thoughtful team decisions around assistive technology. There's a really nice example. If you didn't get to read the chapter, that'd be worth looking at on 188, and just gives a nice example of that consideration of assistive technology. So considering the instructional goals and context, so important in this day and age when the learning context is at home, is critical to successful implementation of AT to support literacy, learning, and use. Okay, so we'll see about our time, but we talked about assistive technology supports for communication, access to material and productivity, and then access to reading and writing. And so we just wondered about taking maybe 1 minute, looking back at your text on those sections and then sharing out what are highlights for you. So I will
On
go.
page,
Oh,
it starts on page 189 with communication.
okay.
So to reiterate what Kristen said, look at the page 189, assistive technology to support communication, or page 191, to support materials and productivity, or page 192, assistive tech to support access to reading.
Need to talk about what they're learning and to participate. I just felt like talking about communication as part of the participation in learning, that, you know, the asking the questions and making a comment, and just thinking about everything that our talking kids say when they're doing a reading instruction or something with their teacher, all the talking that goes on. You can talk about learning too. It's not just about, you know, just the reading part. So I just really liked what it talked about, that you have to have robust communication in order to participate in literacy instruction also.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone else on communication or any other of those three sections?
I was kind of disappointed that they were so brief.
There's a lot more to discuss, isn't there, on assistive technology?
Yeah.
Realms.
This might be something for us to think about when we do the book study next in the fall. Maybe separating these two out or just diving deeper. I think that's one of the reasons we want to include the assistive technology in every single chapter as a focus, as a whole week. Because you're right, there's so much. It's like we've learned all this, now we need to go do it. We still have more to learn, right?
Yes, I agree. And then even in this last section, having maybe an AT chatter on each one of these when we're doing this chapter 11.
I had some thoughts about the section on 192, assistive technology to support access to reading. And I do agree, I understand that when you're going to have students listen to text for comprehension and fluency, you do want to try to grade it to their ability level. But there was kind of some statements made that, you know, if they're listening to text and it's not at their exact comprehension level, that it's not, anyway, there's a whole section here. Is that useful or not? And I think of students, there's just a big mantra in the public schools that we are often not giving students with disabilities access to core curriculum. And as much as we're trying to modify or make, you know, take that idea and put it in a text reader at their level, it's not always available at their level. So when is it a good idea to have students listen and participate, even if it might be above their reading level? But I like, it's kind of assuming competence. Don't we assume that they're taking in more than we think, even if we think they're not? And I almost feel like the way this is written, they don't understand as much as we think they do. And I think the opposite. I think they understand a lot more than we think they do. So that's I'm doing a lot of critical thinking on this.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that this is grounded in research, but my experience is different. And my friend Carnder is a perfect example of that. I mean, what he understands is much higher than his ability to read. So,
mm-hmm. And anyway. They talk about like gaining access to the information versus comprehension. And I think you're right, Rose. And I think it all comes down to, like they talk about, I think in the next chapter, that it's really a combination of practices, right? It's not like you want to do just one of these, but you're building in all these different strategies and instructional time to the day to make sure they're getting practice with all of those types of reading skills. Yeah.
Well, let me give one other example. So one of the slides I made was for team text. Someone had taken very engaging typical novels and has rewritten them at different grade levels. And Newsella does the same thing. That's good. But then I have a lot of students I put on Bookshare and other accessible audiobooks, and they're listening to the original novel, even if it's, you know, they would do better with one graded at their reading level. I think they're still getting something out of it. But then when they have to produce what they know about it, that's where maybe the scaffolding and, you know, taking a section of that text and modifying it for their, you know, is more appropriate. So anyway, it's a struggle to make sure that they have access to core curriculum, but then it's always at their comprehension level, because that math is really difficult for special ed teachers to keep up with. It's just huge.
Especially when you need to consider their auditory comprehension level, which is kind of difficult sometimes,
Yeah.
you know.
Good
I think
discussion.
sometimes I've seen kids where they're put in gen ed to get that exposure, but then there isn't like some sort of interactive activity given to them, especially the kids with like severe motor needs, where they're just kind of sat in gen ed and then they're not getting as much out of it, where they might be taking something, but they're not learning how to use their communication system or do some of this. They don't get the chance to practice the same way their peers do. And then it makes them, as they go through years of doing this, they look like they aren't gaining the information. And I think sometimes that's because we are failing them in making that integrated time truly integrated and useful to them.
Right.
And actually giving them the opportunity to practice their communication skills and their literacy skills and stuff within those settings.
Mm-hmm.
So again, it's not an either or thing, is it?
Right. I appreciated in chapter 12, then they start talking about what does this look like in these different settings, like students in gen ed settings or in separate special ed settings. It's kind of interesting to think about that way.
In our school, we actually merged our DI classes with our resource classes. So there was still a varying amount of skill level, but merging them together versus straight into gen ed with all the supports going in the classroom actually has been somewhat beneficial for our severely impacted students. And there's kind of higher up modeling going on and back and forth and encouraging. It's actually quite beautiful.
That's awesome. I think we'll move on from here and we'll just pass the next two slides, Sari, which are on the things we just discussed. And we'll go to the Sett Framework, which many of you are aware of, but in talking about considering and implementing assistive technology, there are different frameworks. And the Sett Framework, which I see it says SETC Framework in the top corner, that should say Sett Framework. We do
I'll make a note.
Flowchart for AT consideration, but this is not this particular framework is not ours. So we'll fix that slide. But the Sett Framework is one evidence-based approach to making informed decisions regarding AT devices and services. So I was just going to quickly go to that website, but this Sett stands for the student, the environment, the task, and the tools. And I'll just share my screen and yeah, I think that's where I want to go. Okay, so these are the Sett documents. So down here you have consideration of AT needs, a data gathering form, tool selection form, and implementation. I'll just open up the data gathering and we'll need to move on. But it kind of explains that student environment and task portion before you're considering that or taking data on that and then considering the tool. So you got a data form. But this is a whole nother discussion. We have a series about AT consideration and assessment and implementation. That's another book study, the Quiet book study. Or if you feel like you want to dive into this with us around your particular students, we're happy to do that as well. But the Sett Framework gives you something more to look into as a process if your school district doesn't already have a process.
Right. I was going to say,
Oh, go ahead.
oh, also, if you want to talk about how to kind of incorporate it in your process, we can do that.
I found something really interesting by Joy Zabala one time that said that it's not necessarily meant to be done in a certain order, except that the tools come last. And I found that really helpful because I tend to try to define the task first and then think about what I know about the student in regard to that task, what other students are doing, etc., and the environment. So I found that helpful not to think of it as a step-by-step process.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So in a little bit, I'll put up the quiet book study series. And even if you wanted to just go to one of those with consideration or assessment or implementation, you don't have to do all 10. You can just do kind of choose and pick, and then feel free to reach out to us. But they stated teams must also remember that identifying the appropriate AT devices is just one step in the process that almost always involves AT services to ensure that the student can use the device and it is maintained and in good working order. So it's not a one-time deciding a tool and putting it in front of a student, but an ongoing process. Okay, that brings us to chapter 12.
All right.
Organizing and delivering effective instruction. Let's see.
So chapter 12 is organizing. This is a great quote you pulled from the book, Kristen. Comprehensive instruction delivered imperfectly is better than perfect instruction in just one area, and is certainly better than no instruction at all. And so kind of talks about what we mentioned earlier, that there's a lot for us to think about now. In addition to what we're already doing to, in our professional development. And so I like that this chapter gives some ideas about how to combine the emergent and conventional literacy instruction in your class, because you're probably likely to not just have one or the other student, right? So this is a really nice flow chart that they give us to think about this. What are we going to do for our students? What are we teaching them? How are we going to be delivering the instruction? And so looking at these first 4 questions then kind of tells you what to do next. So for these first 4 questions, if you say no to one of them, to one or more, then you will assume that you're going to be doing emergent intervention for that student. And if you say yes to all 4, then you'll be looking at conventional intervention. That you're going to probably combine, like we said, emergent and conventional in your classroom. So on page 202, I liked this approach they have here that talks about if you are doing a combination in your classroom, this is what it'll look like. And they really go through it in a nice way, but they give you the chapter too. They'll say it's going to involve these steps every day, and what chapter they refer to. Let me see, I can't remember what we have. Okay. Any thoughts about this part, where they're talking about like shared reading in a mixed group, decoding? I had to kind of go through it and make my own notes, like shared reading with a mixed group. You could do this with both. And one thing I liked about that, I was thinking about telepractice. If that's part of our world still, then it talks about maybe in the AM you have the whole group and you're doing the shared reading. Then in the PM, the group that's emergent can get on with a therapist or someone. Like, it's a great opportunity for an SLP to come in. They get a chance to reread the text, go through the book in a different way and get in more depth, where that conventional readers are going to be doing something else. I just thought this gave a lot of great ideas for structuring your day, structuring your class. Yeah, there's a comment that it's helpful for a K through 4 life skills teacher, right? Because you've got such different skills. I went through each one, then like decoding, spelling, word identification in a mixed group. I had to write down, okay, this is for both, but this is what it might look like. For instance, it says, just keep in mind that the students working on emergent literacy are working on alphabet and phonological awareness, where their classmates working on conventional literacy skills are focused on decoding, spelling, and word identification. So it's kind of like, you can do this all together. We just got to think about how this, what does this look like for each student? Predictable chart writing is something you can do with both groups. Self-directed reading is both emergent and conventional, as is independent writing. But then writing instruction, you're doing with just your conventional readers. And it talks about scheduling time to teach. What are your thoughts about this chart they have on page 205 with at least 90 minutes a day of reading instruction? One thing I appreciated is that it does talk about, you know, that we have students that have a lot of other needs, and that it's hard to find time to do some of this when you've got bathroom and stretching and all this kind of thing.
I like the part that it's integrated reading and writing activities. So when you think about 90 minutes of reading, it's not just reading, it's the whole package. Because sometimes writing gets left on the back burner somehow, and it's all about reading. But if you think about it as the comprehensive literacy package, I really like that, how it goes back and forth, you know, predictable chart writing, and then phonological awareness.
I only have 15 more minutes on this.
So, anyway.
Yeah, it makes it a little more practical too, that way. All right, I'm gonna move on.
Sherry, can I say
Oh,
one
go
thing
ahead.
about that too?
Yeah,
Maybe,
hi, Shannon.
this was one of the other revelations that I got out of listening to Karen talk, and she said that it was specifically about the limited time, and that teachers can just cycle through. And it was just, I felt like it would be really helpful for teachers to understand that it's okay. You don't have to do everything every day, and you do the best you can, knowing that you, like she said, you know, you end up with an hour and a half of instructional time every day. It's okay. You just have you have those 5 activities that you do, and you just start cycling through. And if you do 1 and a half of the next one this day, that's great. Tomorrow, start at the halfway point and go to the next one and do as much as you can in the next one. And in a week's time, maybe you've done all of them that week.
Right.
Like that. I don't know. I just thought as a teacher that I would think that would be really, you know, relieve my mind that I was doing it.
Yeah, I agree, Shannon.
Have that kind of framework, and that really helped you. So.
Right. And that they talk about also, like, you're not going to write an IP goal for every single piece of your comprehensive instruction. But you're also at the same time looking at what is the student getting. And it was interesting. I think about now, they talk about, like, if at home they're reading at home, they're being read to at home every night, maybe you play into a different part of their instruction a little bit heavier, which just makes me again think about where we're at right now with our therapy and instruction and how we can change. There's a comment that now my child is older, we can spend more time on reading. I agree, the teacher and parents need to spend reading time, at least 90 minutes to practice. Yeah. Okay. Kristen, did you want to talk about this slide?
I think I just wanted up here to remind people that it was in chapter 2, page 28, to read through. And I didn't know if the slide before, Sari, we were going to give them a couple minutes to
did I miss it?
do the questions.
Yep, okay. Sorry, I did miss it. I was
no
a step ahead.
So we were just going to take 2 minutes and again, give you a moment to pick one of these questions, reread that section, kind of review, and then share out some of the highlights from these most common questions. So I'll
yeah,
and we'll share out, and then we'll just be wrapping up.
You're setting your timer, Kristen? Thanks.
Feel free to share it in the chat too if something comes to you. And then we've got about 30 seconds left, and then we'll get together again.
I think I know what question a lot of folks read is why should I focus on the literacy instead of more functional skills? I see a lot of people sharing about that in the chat. And then the behaviors, there was a comment about the teaching with students with intense behaviors. That's the one I just read again, and I like that. I might share a little bit about that if we have time. Literacy is the most important functional skill in real life. People agree. Any other thoughts? Anybody want to hop?
Back to the behavior, I appreciated that earlier in the book she started with talking about motivation and engagement and how that really underlies everything else. And I really appreciated that.
Yeah, I loved her example in the behavior. I just have to share it because she was talking about at camp a student with a lot of behaviors, and he really wanted to look through the YouTube videos. That's what he wanted to do. And so gradually taking his lead, they just made note of what those videos were the first day. The next day they identified or they talked about the letter that the video started with, and then gradually he would choose the letter that the video started with. And then, I mean, a lot of that is also building rapport, right, and connection with somebody, but following their lead. And I thought that was a neat example.
It made me think of a student that has severe ASD, and he's very obsessed about the toilet bowl. And, you know, all of the staff always spending so much energy to get him out of the bathroom, get him away from running to the bathroom. And now after this, I kind of feel like I want to try to work with the vocabulary in the bathroom. I want to start to spell, you know, flush, or take some common words that are in the bathroom, toilet paper, and try to link some literacy with that, because he's very into it, but it might be really interesting. So I'm kind of eager to try that.
Yeah, and where can you go from there? There
Right.
other mechanical things he's interested in that have that same function maybe. And yeah, I love that, Terry.
And then someone shared in the chat, we have students write the name of the song they wanted to listen to.
Great. Yeah, and then Shannon sharing with that behavior example, the YouTube video, and you didn't wait to get the behavior under control before offering instruction. Great point. I wonder if anybody read, how do I know my students are learning? I think we can tell with the engagement piece, right? That's a
Mhm.
big part of it.
Okay. Well, so the next slide just mentions the Literacy Bill of Rights for you to check back on. And then we just wanted to end with what's one thing you want to implement in your literacy instruction now. And either share out through the chat, share out speaking up, or just something to think about too as you plan for the next year.
Mm-hmm. Obviously, you might have more than one thing, but I was thinking, you know, like that old thing when you go to a conference and you're like, I'm just going to have one takeaway, at least one thing that I come back with and implement after life gets in the way.
Yeah, but that one thing might be I'm coming back for the book study in the fall and I'm bringing my team and
Mm-hmm.
having some someone to implement with. Okay, the alternative pencil for a couple of for students.
Oh, that's a great one. More books. Read to self time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I liked the red, yellow, green too. We didn't have time to discuss that, but I really liked how they matched across, you know, or mixed across. I thought that made a lot of sense.
Yeah, that's on page 197 if you want to look back at that and see what they're talking about. But yeah, that's a great point.
Lots of great things coming up in the chat. Hopefully you're reading along. We might not get to read out all of them. So for next year, I'm going to add Mad Libs and sorry, the chat went away from my view, so I've got to find it again. And allow my kids to pick the word to fill in the blank in a field of 2.
Fun.
Someone else's goal is to get some more teachers gathered to join their in the fall for maybe the book study.
Mm-hmm. Supporting older students with and teachers of older students finding ways to support more literacy, not just functional skills. Integrating it into work tasks.
And if you're one that wants to speak up instead of write, we can pause for that too. Access to Tar Heel Reader, what a great resource.
That will be one of the topics next fall. 1 week we'll dive into that.
Increase meaningful writing and incorporate more phonological awareness activities in a fun way for kids.
Then let us know what you do.
Yeah.
That's the other thing. If you do come back in the fall, I feel like we're pushing that a lot, but we're just excited about it. So if you do come back in the fall and you try some of these things, that's going to be so exciting for us to hear about.
And I think we'll maybe create another kind of shared space where we can share out ideas as we implement.
That's a great idea.
What that could be, whether it's Padlet or Facebook page, or maybe we can find out in the beginning with those who join what kinds of platforms work well.
Mm-hmm.
Sharing out.
Ed Webb.
Ed Webb, thank you, Linda.
You are going to have to stick around, Linda.
Yeah, you're going to have to help us remember, get us going. Well, we've so appreciated all of you each week coming together to go through this with us and share your ideas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we know your time is valuable and I really appreciate it.
More chats coming in.
Mm-hmm. Does anybody want to explain the red, yellow, green a little bit more? Because I think that's a really important concept and several people talked about it.
I was impressed with it. I know there's a chart. I can't find it on my iPhone is where I have my book.
Oh, yeah.
But I did appreciate, I never really thought about it, but it made such sense. They broke down the tasks that we're asking our students to do, from physical tasks to an academic task. What was the other task? Someone help me. There was another one. I don't have it in front of me. But if, say, someone was at standing, what was it?
Communication, positions, and academic.
Yes, and communication, of course. So if we were challenging a student to work on their physical standing ability, and they're at a standing table, we wouldn't want to that's a red, because that's a physical skill that's maybe really challenging for that student. So then I know sometimes you might want to work on maybe some communication skills, but if working on their AT device is a red also, you're probably not going to maximize either one of those skills very well. So they had you they suggest just really breaking down what we're asking our students to do in those 3 areas and assigning it a red, yellow, or green. So maybe for that student, they're really enjoy just listening to some music maybe, and working on the red, which might be standing at being at the stander. So I just thought that made so much sense. And I liked how they broke it out.
It'd be interesting too for the students who kind of participate, helping them identify what level things are for them.
Yeah, yeah.
So.
Thanks for sharing, Carrie. Well, it's 1 o'clock. So we will wrap up, but there's a request to send the chat out because there are so many great ideas, and we'll do that.
Yeah, I'll save the files. Oh, Sarah, are you saving the file too?
I'll save it.
I think I've got it saved to my computer, it says. So if I can locate it, we're good.
You want to stop the, oh, here we go.
Everybody have a good summer.